I think it's more than Cincinnati's, dude. Although he does favor. He's got some similar stuff. He's like a Roman god, right? Look at him. He's jacked. He's got his abs. He's up here in the Pantheon. Here he's got a patch. This is the roof of the Capitol. I mean, not the roof, but the dome, the rotunda. So George Washington is kind of made it into mythology now. He's like a mythical figure, isn't he? And that's cool, you know, because I always have considered him one of my 3 favorite presidents. He's pretty easy to be a favorite, though. He's a person, good stuff. But I've given you a little bit of bio of him here. Wasn't really schooled. He had a tutor and a preacher who tutored him a little bit, but didn't go to college. Wasn't like Jefferson or Adams. He was a wealthy dude. Lawrence was going to be the guy, you know, he was his half brothers and the oldest son of his dad, but he died. See this? Lawrence gets TB. Good thing G-Dub gets smallpox because it means he's going to be resistant, actually probably immune to it. When we see him at Valley Forge, which was a terrible winter, smallpox, they call it the bloody pox. So when Lawrence dies of TB, he inherits one of the largest estates in all of Virginia. He marries a widow who at 27 was one of the largest landholders in Virginia. And he is an enormously wealthy guy, like for Virginian standards, pretty strong, you know, pretty rich guy. He was a colonel in the militia, which was basically the leader of it. He answered to the governor. You may recall he's the guy who goes out to Fort Duquesne and kickstarts the French and Indian War. His profession was surveyor, and that had really benefited him well because he had traveled out west a lot. He's the one who went out past the Appalachians first go around. So pretty smart guy. I'll put this online. I know it's not on there yet, but I'll upload it. And I picked this picture because I'd like some feedback on what you guys see here. This is a picture of George Washington at Mount Vernon. This has been one of the most difficult things to deal with as a country. So we've tried all kinds of different ways. We tried to ignore it, and maybe it didn't matter that we would tell ourselves. But the fact is our earliest founders, many of them were slave owners. So then you get into a debate about, well, what kind of slave owner were they? And it seems that Washington, among many of the other slave owner class, was fairly benevolent, meaning not completely evil when it came to his slaves. He had a very good relationship with them. But this scene here is probably utterly preposterous. You understand that it looks sort of like genteel and hanging out together, comfortably working in the fields. And I can't imagine that this is the lifestyle, based on what I've read, for America's slave population. So Washington was a slave owner. He did free the slaves he owned on his death. So that's some sign of positivity, I'd say, right? But nonetheless, this is an issue. But when the founders, you know, the framers of the 55 demigods were writing the Constitution, they knew what they were writing. When they created Article 2 of the Constitution, which had the president, they knew exactly who they expected to be president. All right. And so here's the Electoral College. So what confuses students to this day is how the Electoral College works. But it's pretty simple. Each state, right, casts votes for electors. Now you'll notice that neither North Carolina, New York, or Rhode Island vote. And that is because they have not ratified the Constitution yet. Technically, those 3 states were not even in America yet in the very first election. But you had folks who were what we might call today Federalists. They were certainly the people who supported the Constitution. And then you had a group that were called like the Anti-Federalists, who were less in favor. But when they voted for elector, every elector voted on his first ballot for George Washington. Each elector gets 2 ballots then. So the way the founders envisioned presidential elections was whoever was the best candidate would become president, and whoever was the second best candidate would become vice president. So by virtue of this, George Washington is elected unanimously. He gets 100% of the electors. Every elector votes for him. And then over half of the electors vote for John Adams, okay, who's not in those pictures. So John Adams will become the first vice president. Keep in mind, they weren't running at all. I tell people this all the time. Nobody ran for president. They would look at today's politics as a vulgar display of an appeal to popularity. Back then, you stood for office. What that meant was you allowed your name to be included in a group of people who would be voted on. And that was it. That's all you did. So if you were worthy enough, what would people do? They'd elect you. And if not, well, then so be it. And so that's it. That's how the elections work. You know, George Washington made no effort to be president at all. None. In fact, he probably did not want it, you know, based on what he says about it and stuff like that. He was so happy to retire again, right? To go back to his vine and fig tree, as he called it. So he's back to Mount Vernon. When the word comes out on the first Tuesday after the second Wednesday in December, that's when the electors vote. When they got around to voting, keep in mind, there was really no popular election that mattered. You understand? States selected their electors, and then that's who voted. So we got George Washington, first president by unanimity. And one of the things he does, which is a real precedent, is he creates a body of advisors to make decisions over the agencies of the national government. So what some people forget is that the executive branch is not just the president. It's all federal agencies, as well as, of course, the president. So our very first cabinet is probably one of the who's of history. All right. So the very first office created is the State Department. What's the State Department do, y'all? What's the Secretary of State do? Oh, wow, you guys, I thought you were attentive public. The State Department, filled by Thomas Jefferson, our first Secretary of State. All right, the State Department is responsible for America's relationship with other countries. So this is your nation's ambassadors. This is representing us to other people. And so basically our country abroad is the State Department. Okay. Secondly, standing here, sitting here, Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury. What to do with the nation's finances, particularly things like taxes, commerce, investment. So the Secretary of the Treasury.
Wait, so what was Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton?
State, there's Hamilton. State, Secretary of State is TJ. Secretary of the Treasury, right? Hamilton. Money. Secretary of War. Now, we don't have a War Department anymore. We have a Defense Department. Sounds better, right? But Secretary of War was Washington's old friend and the Massachusetts bookseller Henry Knox. This is the big fella, Ox Knox, Henry Ox Knox. Henry Knox, Fort Knox, Knoxville, Tennessee, Secretary of War. So that's your beginning cabinet. After the year 1790, you have another person added to the cabinet. And that is the Attorney General, who was the only secretary who's not called secretary. The Attorney General is the head of the Justice Department. And so the Justice Department's head is filled by Virginian Edmund Randolph. So you've got those four, starting with the original three secretaries and the Attorney General, who is responsible for the nation's enforcement of law. Today, the Attorney General is over things like the FBI and, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, all that kind of stuff. Okay, justice. So that was a cabinet, and there's nothing in the Constitution about creating a cabinet. So Washington just does it. He makes it up, and to this day, we still have it. We call Washington the president of precedents. Like pretty much everything he does is precedent setting. So it's noteworthy, right? So this is a splendid collection of luminaries. Now, what is interesting to me particularly is who is not in here. And one of the people who is not in here is the vice president. Who is the vice president this time? John Adams. And John Adams' feelings really got hurt. He was really hurt feelings that he was not not part of the cabinet. In fact, Washington basically told him to get out one day when he was having cabinet. The reason is not because, I mean, Washington had a great deal of respect for Adams. He really dug him. But it's because when Washington read the Constitution, of course, he was there, he made it. He thought that the vice president was actually part of the legislative branch. And technically, he's not wrong. The vice president is the only person in America who is part of two branches. Because what is the official role of the vice president? There's only one. He only has one role. He doesn't even do it anymore. The last vice president to do it was about 8 years ago on tie.
They're going to vote in the Senate.
Go ahead, say it loud, Nicholas.
Vote in the Senate for Tom Brady.
Okay. He is the president of the Senate. All right, that is his job, to preside over the Senate. Now, John Adams hated that job. Right? He really hated it because early on he was kind of telling the young senators how to do their job. So they passed a rule of the Senate that the vice president cannot participate in debate. All he can do is cast a tie-breaking vote. So to this day, they consider the vice presidency a sort of nothing office. And, you know, in terms of, it's where, you know, politicians' careers go to die, was kind of the thought, you know. So nonetheless, the VP didn't do very much. But John Adams was very, you know, dedicated to his work, and he never missed a day in the Senate. Even though he had to sit there and listen to his inferiors debate. All right, so that's what's called the cabinet. It's one of the things Washington has to do for it. Now, keep in mind, where is the capital? Anybody know? We are in New York, where he takes office, and then very quickly they're going to move to Philadelphia. All right, so your first capital of America was New York, then Philadelphia, and then they're going to create a national district. I'll get to how that happens tomorrow, the next day, depending on my test stuff. So speaking of making compromises or deals. So by far, as much as it's neat that Thomas Jefferson was in the cabinet, Thomas Jefferson spends most of his time negotiating with Native American chiefs. That's the foreigners that we work with, you know, mostly. Jefferson will only be Secretary of State during the first term, so he won't do a lot of the other stuff later. You definitely need to know this. Now, this is why your reading guide might benefit you, but this is Hamilton's plan, y'all, and it is almost always on the AP exam from this presidency. Hamilton's plan, because Hamilton, well, A, one of the reasons why I think it's really popular lately is the musical. You know, the musical has been a cultural phenomenon, right? You know, the musical Hamilton. But B, because Hamilton is the creator of our national economy. So there are 5 parts, which I'm showing you. Okay? And I want to look at each one individually. So I want you to think about each one. I'll go slowly, but if you're writing while I'm talking, you know, you're missing. So think about it this way. Hamilton recognizes that the success of America, early on success, is depending on being able to get capital, being able to get money, right? Well, there's really only way to get money that you don't have. What is it? Well, I guess there's a couple ways. You can steal it, but borrow it, right? Loans, good, Gabriel, that's right. So you could borrow it, but the problem is, what do you have to have in order to borrow money? You have to have credit, good credit, right? And a lot of people in Congress were talking about we should just eliminate the national government from the Revolutionary era's debt. Keep in mind, that was the Articles of Confederation's government, right? And Hamilton said that would be completely foolhardy. You cannot eliminate the Articles of Confederation's debt, because then what will no one do? No one will loan us money again, you know, because we will have defaulted on our loan. So what are we going to do? We're going to pay off the debt at face value, or funding at par. That's the phrase that you need to know. We will pay off the debt at the value that it says. Now, this has a backfire. This kind of stuff shades her value was a little over. Who had been a lot of the bondholders of this debt? Veterans, soldiers, and who had gone around and who will go around and buy up a lot of these bonds at much less than face value? Speculators, like sharks, who will see that they'll know what Hamilton's doing. They'll go out and buy it, and then Hamilton will pay them, not Hamilton personally, but the federal government will pay them at face value. So do they make money on it? Yeah, and so nonetheless, Hamilton will say, that's their fault for selling. So pay off the Confederation government's debt, America's debt from earlier on. But even better, and some people are really against this, is to pay off all the debt of the states. So we're going to assume, that's the phrase, assumption. We're going to assume to take on, like to assume the debt of all the states, particularly the most debt-ridden states like Massachusetts and New York. We're going to take on their debt, right? Why on earth would they do that? Perhaps, but why is that his concern? Hamilton is brilliant, guys. This is a brilliant strategy. These two things collectively go together. He presents these, by the way, in his report on public credit, letter A here. So why do this? Why create? Hamilton is also called the father of the American debt, father of the national debt. Why do it? Nobody online? Oh, missing Hamilton. That's why Hamilton. You guys, you're supposed to know this. It's Hamilton stuff. Okay, listen carefully then, since you don't know. First of all, the largest group of debt holders will be rich Americans. Who better to tie the future of the United States to than rich people? Well, they have a vested interest in America surviving because they're owed money, all right? So first of all, you will get the wealthy class to want to guarantee the success of this experiment. And they do. They get their money, but they definitely, I want to make sure they're not going to want to overthrow it. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, by taking on the state's debts, who is clearly superior? The federal, right? And so this is Hamilton's way of saying we are the government and the state governments are secondary. So, and we will tie the future of the success of this country to the wealthy class. That was a smart move because it worked. Now, again, I would like you to know, and he proposes a small tax on foreign products. So that's a tariff, a small one, in order to generate some more money. The money would then be used to support who? Early factory development. Because what will happen is if you put tariffs on British manufactured goods, does that mean Americans are more likely to buy American-made products? And will Americans have jobs? So that's the argument. It's a small, it's not really enough of a tariff to be protectionist, but it's enough money to make some money off of. Keep in mind that most of the money will still be from land sales. So the report on public credit and report on manufacturing are his two epochal productions to the U.S. Congress, the House and the Senate. The problem for him is they're not getting anywhere. They're not passing the Senate or the House. Anybody know who the House Majority Leader is? The guy who's behind the scenes running the House? He's a fellow named James Madison, if you're wondering where that name went. And James Madison had been partnered with Hamilton. What did Hamilton and Madison work together on? What were they partners on? Oh man, you guys got here. Thank you. The Federalist Papers. Good, the Federalists. Well, now Madison is going to oppose Hamilton. Madison is afraid of this assumption. He thinks it's going to put the debt, he's going to put Virginia sort of as an inferior to USA. And he writes about thinking it's unfair that the veterans are getting ripped off. So Madison looks like, and Madison has the votes to kill him. So Hamilton's despairing. So who actually worked with Hamilton and was good friends with Madison? And sort of didn't have a dog in the hunt, so to speak. A fellow named Thomas Jefferson. All right. So Thomas Jefferson has Madison and Hamilton over for dinner. It's cool, right? They're eating. And when they come out, the next day, Madison stops blocking the bill. And a week later, Hamilton gives support to a capitol being built on the banks of the Potomac River. So what we, people who study this period of history, believe is that Jefferson got Madison to trade with Hamilton. Hamilton would not stop where the capital is. Where is the capital of America today? It's on the border of Virginia, right? Has that worked out to our benefit? You better believe it. Tons and tons of jobs. So what they do is Madison wants the capital in Virginia. Hamilton wants it where? in New York. Hamilton's a New Yorker. You know, he wants it there. Madison is going to stop assumption. Hamilton wants assumption. So the thinking is that Jefferson gets Hamilton to give up New York and Madison to stop blocking assumption. So where will the national capital be built? Outside of Virginia. All right. And that's because of a conversation they had over dinner. Pretty cool. Well, I know it based on the fact that at least two big historians have written about what they talked about, based on letters that have extracted out. We don't know exactly how it was worded. Nobody kept minutes, but we know exactly what happened afterwards. So before we know what was going on and after we know what was going on. So you have to conclude something happened there. You're right. I don't know exactly what was said, but clearly Hamilton stopped blocking Virginia being the site of the capital and got assumption because this passes. Now, the other most controversial thing that Hamilton does, and this one is going to have long-term consequences, is number 4, the creation of what we will from this moment on call the BUS, the Bank of the United States. Now, keep in mind, this is not like any bank that you've ever been to. Okay? The bank is created by the federal government, but operated by private people. So that's kind of weird, right? Created by the government, but operated by private citizens. And it will hold all the federal government's money, its assets. So that's what it means by repository of national assets. That means the government's like resources, the tax collection and land sales are going to go in this. And it's not a single bank. There's about 6 of them at the time that proposed. Okay? The charter banks of the United States. They will issue what are called bank notes. You guys got any dollar bills on you? Take a dollar bill out of your pocket, look up at the top, and tell me what it says. I'll do this more than once.
It says Federal Reserve Note.
Federal Reserve Note. Well, that's our current national bank, a Federal Reserve. There are 12 branches, right? So that means the money we have is issued from a bank. So that's what the Bank of the United States is. Bank notes. That's what they call them. Instead of dollars, they're bank notes. All right? And the American money will be what? U.S. banknotes. Got it? And then it will also loan capital out to smart, prudent investors. So we will take America's money and loan it to really smart people who will invest it smartly, and thus America will make more money. The Bank of the United States. Now, does anybody see any potential problem with this?
What's locking the money up?
Oh, now that's a good point. That money back then will be backed by gold, which is accepted as specie, you know.
That is
Why let private people own it? Run it? They don't own it. They run it. They manage it because they didn't have a federal like the Treasury Department didn't have Treasury officers to run a bank. I guess is the best way to put it. Basically, they're relying on. It'd be like if you paid tax dollars and then went to a private school that your tax dollars paid. You know, so the idea is the bank was created and supported by tax money, but it was operated by people who were private, private bankers. Okay? And they were smart bankers, prudent. Nobody else see the problem with this? I get it. You guys haven't read Article 1. You don't know much about the Constitution. But if you read Article 1, Section 8, it's the powers granted to Congress. Guess what ain't a power granted to Congress? No, that's definitely a power grant. He said to issue money. Definitely can do that. Coin and circulate money, yes. Try again. Nobody? Regulate taxes, we got that. There's nothing in there about creating a bank. There's nothing in the Constitution about creating a Bank of the United States. Nothing, anywhere. So where in the world is Hamilton saying this is the government's job? I thought y'all had civics at some point. I must not learn what I think.
It was in 7th grade.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
4 years ago?
4 years ago.
Wow, that literally represents 25% of your life. I understand. Wow, that's amazing. That's so long ago.
So,
Yeah, 25% of my life was like 12 years ago. That's awesome. All right. So we'll talk more about number 4. And then number 5, hey, let's make a little bit more money. Tax farmers. Now, an excise, oh, wait, what? Tax farmers? You can't tax whiskey. Oh. What does that mean? why are farmers going to be upset about taxes on whiskey? Do they like to drink whiskey? Is that it? Good for farmers, best case, but no. But yes, but the major reason is because they would turn their corn into whiskey because that was more profit, more return on your investment to ship liquor than it was shipped, helped by corn.
Yeah.
And so this was their money, and they hated it so much so that what they do, very much a tradition of America, they rebelled.
Rebel.
Yeah, they rebelled. That's right. Big difference in it is this ain't Shays' Rebellion. Who is the law and order president? George Washington. He marches a force of something like 16,000 men into Pennsylvania. They all run away. And that's that. He pardons them, and that's the end of the story, right? What though is the difference is between 86 and 94. Having a strong executive who has the authority to quell insurrection. He has that power under the Constitution. Understand? So these two of these things are for money, which two things are for revenue.
Tariffs and business.
Oh, and excise tax is simply a tax on a specific item. So like cigarettes have excise taxes on them, right? Just literally on that item. As opposed to say income tax or sales tax, which is on anything. And excise tax is like that specific thing. Only has it. So you have the whiskey tax and you have a revenue tariff. And then the other three things are for fixing the nation's economy. And based on my studies, this thing has worked very, very well. Okay? I mean, people don't like it. A lot of people don't. But he gets it passed through Congress. Okay? Here you can see the insurrectionists, tarring and feathering a whiskey tax collector. Does that look vaguely similar? As if he were the same, as the stamp tax collector, right? Or the tea tax. And here you can see what is George Washington doing in this cartoon. Yeah, he's bottling it up. I ain't gonna let this happen. Here you can see him. By the way, it's also the last time, first and last time, a president personally commanded troops in the field. So it'd be weird, like Donald Trump went to Iraq and led a tank division, right? So that would be odd. Washington rode at the head of a massive army to put down this insurrection. And so it worked. They stopped insurrecting. Okay? But I want to come back to this problem of the bank, because this is going to create the very first political party debate in American history. There were no political parties in the election of 1788, right? No political parties. But what Hamilton does is he interprets the Constitution. And we know that Hamilton has a pretty good understanding of it because he freaking helped write it, right? And he wrote the Federalist Papers. The problem is he's arguing with Madison a lot of times, who also did what? Wrote the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, So the question is interpretation. So I want you to look at this. Now, you do not have to copy it. You do not have to copy it. You should have it on your heart, right? Because this is Article 1 of the Constitution's Section 8, which is the enumerated, meaning in a numbered list, the powers of Congress, like what Congress specifically can do. Right off the bat, what are we going to make sure Congress can do? Collect taxes. Remember, major weakness of the articles could what? Borrow money. To borrow money on the credit, it's also coin money. Somewhere here. Coin money. As well as decide that we're on the imperial system and not the metric, right? Commerce, right here. It is. Naturalization is how to become a citizen. Rules, right? Counterfeiting, post offices, promote the arts and sciences. Yay. Constitute tribunals, that means lesser courts beyond the Supreme Court, below the Supreme Court. And all the way down here, some stuff about the military. By the way, a letter of marque is for a pirate. So we can grant letters of marque to have privateers. Yeah, I want a letter of marque. I don't get a pirate. Militias, regulating the militias. A district, that's DC. But I've highlighted here, number 18. I want you to write not the terminology of it, but the what it is. So let's read Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. It's kind of easy to remember. It's like 18. It reads, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. So first of all, it's called the Necessary and Proper Clause. Hear that? Necessary and proper. By the way, you can put in parentheses beside it. It's commonly nicknamed the elastic clause. Why elastic, y'all? It's stretchy, right? Yeah, elastic.
It's flexible.
Yeah. Carrying into execution all the other powers foregoing and all other powers vested by the Constitution and the government of the U.S. or any department thereof, maybe the Secretary of the Treasury. To make all laws necessary and proper to execute these. So to be able to coin in money, or to be able to collect taxes, to be able to borrow money, Hamilton is going to argue what is essential. If I can collect taxes, borrow money, and store the money, what do I need? What does he create that some critics say is unconstitutional? A bank, right? Well, there's nothing in the Constitution about a bank, but there is something in the Constitution about making all laws which are necessary and proper. You don't have to write the whole thing. Just remember, necessary, proper, and elastic law. I don't say write it verbatim. Know the names of it. Because out of the necessary and proper clause comes what is called the doctrine of implied powers. The doctrine of implied powers. It is not denied. So this is what Hamilton and his supporters, who we are going to call the Federalists, believe. If it is not denied, and there are as implied, and it's delegated, then it is conceded, allowed, that implied powers are to be considered equally with express ones. Express ones are another word for these. The powers that the Constitution tells the government it can do, right? What is he saying is on the equal footing with express powers? Implied power, right? Then it follows that the power of erecting a corporation, like a bank, may well be implied as any other thing. It may well be employed as an instrument or the means of carrying into execution the specified power. Okay? It is the province of the federal government to regulate those objects, general sovereign or legislative power to regulate a thing, to employ all the means which is regulation, means wordy, and the best and greatest advantage. Hamilton says, this thing gives me the authority to do what? Make a bank, assumption, funding a car, all that stuff. It's the details, like that I'm supposed to fill in. But for Jeffersonians, they're like, no. And by the way, this is the same debate we are having in the Constitution right now over Supreme Court justice appointment. Strict construction. Originalists, like our current nominee, like Scalia versus Ginsburg, right? You do have to know this. So who is Hamilton's great rival throughout his entire time? Jefferson. He's his intellectual rival, right? Hamilton is from the same philosophy or mindset as Hobbes. Do you guys remember Thomas Hobbes? Man is corrupt. Man is selfish. Man is greedy, Hobbes would say. Hamilton would say. Therefore, why do we need a strong centralized government? Do not worry about the public opinion so much, right? To keep order in a chaotic society. Guys, that's conservatism. That is the definition of conservatism. Order in a chaotic society. Liberalism is freedom in a chaotic society. You understand? That's literally the difference between the two. Everything else is debate. All right? It is a good thing to have, and this is kind of stuff Madison wrote, and now it's kind of not, he's kind of poo-pooing it now that he's back in Virginia. Some people believe Jefferson got home from France and kind of scolded Madison. Like, what are you doing? They're giving away the store up there. The point is that government's job, Hamilton believes, is to maintain order out of chaos, or to correct, to control order. Jefferson is a philosopher who studied David Hume and studied John Locke. And he believes that in a society, we're free. So the function of government is to protect that freedom. The more government, the less freedom. Now, that is not modern liberalism. That is modern libertarianism. You understand the difference? No, I'd like you to learn it. Modern liberalism says the government should help fix the problems of society because they're so big. And that's understandable. But that's not what Jefferson meant as a liberal. Jefferson meant there should be no government to interfere with my liberty. And today, that's much more libertarian. All right, if you ever hear that political, that's what it is. He's what we call a classical liberal, like Thomas Paine, one of the founders of classical liberalism. John Locke. Government exists to protect your natural rights. Now, I'm not going to say that Hamilton didn't share some of these views when he was overthrowing what government? The British, right. So in other words, Washington, Adams, Hamilton, these men are not like pro-monarchy. It's what degree of a strong centralized government, right? And so for Jefferson, too much. The bank is the beginning of the end, kind of thing. Why keep state governments in power? By the way, this will consistently be Jefferson's opinion. Why state governments? Or even better, local governments.
So everyone's voices are.
Very good. More chance to influence the outcome. The more local it is, the more close it is to you, the more control you have over it. Remember, this is a guy who said the best school of liberty is the town hall meeting, right? Not the Supreme Court, not the Congress. But so for Jefferson and his supporters, if the Constitution does not guarantee the right or power, I should say right, the power, then is it available? No. So when we talk about Justice Scalia saying there is no right to privacy in the Constitution, he's not wrong. There is no right. However, many people believe in the 10th Amendment, there is a right to privacy because that is reserved power. Or, even better, implied powers, meaning implied rights. So I'll talk about rights and powers again, but here we go. Last point for today. We'll move on to the next election. But Jefferson, the term for what Jefferson takes is called strict constructionist. Today we call it originalist, meaning it must be, if it's not explicitly authorized, it's prohibited. If it's not explicit, then it goes too far. Hamilton and his supporters are what we would call loose constructionists, meaning if it's not prohibited, it's allowed. The doctrine of implied powers. The 10th Amendment prohibits the federal government to do things beyond what's delegated to it. Only the states are allowed to do what not directly allowed to the federal. So your states' rightists, you heard that phrase? Are your states' rightists the folks who advocate that it's the state's right to do something? Never heard that phrase? Many defenders of the Southern position in the Civil War is that it was the South's right as states to secede from the Union. It's called states' rights argument. That's all. That's why I was getting at it. We'll talk more about that, of course. The 10th Amendment prohibits the national government, but that's a beautiful quandary. You guys sense the quandary? Here's the 10th Amendment. So read that. Powers not delegated nor prohibited are reserved. So we don't call what states and national governments do rights. We call them powers. Right? They don't have rights, they have powers. We have rights. Okay? But the reserved powers of the states are anything not what to the federals. What's then that a trick with? Which two things are an inherent source of tension in the Constitution? The elastic clause, necessary and proper, they ain't delegated. You understand? Necessary and proper says there's all kinds of stuff we might need to be able to do this stuff, right? It says if it's not in there, you can't what? Do it. So that's the tension. It doesn't override it. The 10th Amendment does not cancel out the elastic clause. In other words, it didn't strike the elastic clause and put that down. It just said, oh, we want to make sure to reserve. So for example, let me give you one of my most famous ones I use for states' power. Should you as students be able to bring firearms to school? Okay. Well, I mean, it's a simple question. Should students be able to bring guns to school? Okay, no, I agree. You should not, okay? So should the federal government pass a law to prohibit you from bringing guns to school? Like the Gun-Free School Zone Act? Yeah? Under what power can the government do that?
Elastic clause.
Yeah, but where up there is it an elastic ability to prohibit guns in school? Supreme Court struck it down. U.S. v. Lopez. It was unconstitutional. If someone wants to deny your right to bear arms at school, then it needs to be your what? Your state. And your state can very well, as our state is. Okay? But the point is that that's an authority. And I know it sounds weird to hear that the government can't do stuff, right? But our government does not have unlimited authority. It is limited by what? The Constitution. And so therein lies the tension in our country between the 10th Amendment, which is the reserve powers, and Article 1, Section 18, or 118, which is the elastic clause. Now, that's tricky, but this is the debate we are still having, literally. Judge Barrett is a originalist. Justice Ginsburg was a loose constructionist. And so that means that if she is replaced, the liberals on the court are going to be like less number. And that makes particularly Democrats very nervous. Because there are a lot of stuff that people have the right to that aren't guaranteed in the Constitution. Elements of them. Oh, wait, the National Security Act or the National Security Agency? But some of the things the agency did under the 9/11, under the Patriot Act, struck that. But the part about the Defense Department, the part about the executive branch authority to protect, there's a lot of, in Article 2, there's some open turf there. The creation of the NSA is part of what, we'll get to that later, I don't want to confuse too much, but it's protected under the authority of the executive branch. This is the legislative branch, the law being passed. All right, so we'll go to another election, but you can probably take a wild guess how this one's going to turn out. I'm not working my PowerPoint, but we're going to stop with that. All right, so I'm going to unlock your quizzy. Let's go ahead and take it today, and have a nice day. Put your mask on. Oh, everybody. Just for a second. Let me unlock this.
We're allowed to run on the train.
Oh, yeah.